I'm Leslie Maddox, and I like to get into the nitty-gritty of homeschooling because I believe it's the details that can make the difference between a good and a bad day. Today I'll be sharing with you a mid-year update of my first graders' homeschool year so far. I've separated out updates for my various kids into different videos so that we don't have one long video to watch and can instead just focus on what specifically interests you. So if you're interested in my fourth graders' work or my preschoolers' work or in science or history specifically, look for those videos. A couple of them probably aren't out yet if you're watching this video when it first comes out, but be on the lookout. All right, so jumping right on into my first graders' year, I'll share with you first our biggest change. The biggest change in his school year so far is our grammar curriculum. Now, if you've seen my curriculum choices video, this probably won't surprise you. We started off the school year using first language lessons and the first level of first language lessons. I chose that because we already had it, really no other reason than that. I'd started off using that with my oldest when he was in first grade. It hadn't been a fit for him, and at the time I felt that the issue was that my oldest is not an auditory learner at all, like not even a little bit. And first language lessons is a scripted curriculum where you sit and you talk with your kid and they learn from listening to what you have to say. And that does not work for him at all. And so I thought I attributed his difficulties with first language lessons to a difference in learning styles. My second son is very different than that. He's a communicator. He loves to sit and have conversations. He is very much an auditory learner. So I thought it might work for him. And so I went ahead and tried it, and it didn't take long before I saw, now that it had been a couple of years since I'd used it and had more experience as an educator and, you know, teaching my kids and with different types of curriculum, I realized the issue wasn't just a learning style issue. The issue that my son had wasn't just a learning style issue. There's an inherent problem, I feel, with the curriculum, and it's that it doesn't teach from the known to the unknown. That's a tenet that I try to live by with my kids and educating my children, to present new information, new concepts on the backdrop, piggybacking it on things that they know already and know pretty well, have some experience with. Even with adults, I mean, when I taught adult Bible studies, I tried to limit each class to one major concept, because even that one concept, sometimes they didn't even remember that. So I tried to limit it, even for adults, grown people, to like one major word or phrase to focus on for that could summarize that lesson. So with my kids, you better believe that each time we sit to learn about something, I don't want a bunch of stuff thrown at them, because I know they're probably not going to be able to retain it all. If adults are going to have difficulty retaining a bunch of things at one time, children probably will too, right? So that's my common sense approach. And so with first language lessons, it does a lot of that. It does a lot of throwing several new things at them and verbally, and kind of expecting them to just get it. So I've explained it a lot. Now let me give you a couple of examples. Maybe you'll see what I mean or why we struggled with it. For example, to begin with, first I'll say that first language lessons, this first level, it teaches nouns, the definition of a noun, talks about common nouns and proper nouns, and then I think later on it gets into verbs. We never got that far. But you know, the parts that we took part in the curriculum was about nouns. And so when teaching the child that a noun is a person, is a word that represents a person, it uses people in the family, but like in the extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. And it goes in depth into exactly what those family relationships are. And right off, that was a problem. It starts off with talking about grandparents. Your grandfather, who's your grandfather? Who's your grandmother? Problem for us is that we don't use those words to talk about their grandparents. So like for my father, they don't call him grandfather. They don't call him grandpa. They call him abuelo, which is Spanish for grandfather. My father-in-law, they call him Pawpaw. And we don't say your grandfather's coming over. We say Pawpaw's coming over, or Abuelo is coming over. So, I mean, we've used the terms grandparents and grandfather and grandmother in the past, but really not that much. And that's not how they think of those people. They think of them as Abuelo, Pawpaw. And so right away we had to get into that, well, grandfather is like Pawpaw is your grandfather, and Abuelo is your grandfather. We had to get into this conversation right away, and which threw us off because I'm sitting here trying to teach grammar to them, and now I'm having to explain family relationships. And you could say, well, why don't you just change the script? And I tried that, but it went to great detail, and this was over a couple of different days. It starts going into aunts and uncles, and those are also words we don't necessarily use. And cousins, you know, your cousin is your mother's father's or your mother's brother's son or daughter, or your mother's sister's son or daughter, or your father's brother's. It goes into all that, and the kids are supposed to be repeating that back. And I could see my son, he just kind of had this look on his face like, what? So here I am on the board trying to diagram family relationships, and I just want to teach the grammar to him, you know? So it was really frustrating. And even further on, talking about a noun being like a place, and then talking about proper nouns that are places. They want to focus on the child's address and the street name and the name of their town and their state, and you know, those are, I've done a lot of mapping with the kids, and those are things that we've talked about. And actually my first grader, part of his copy work this year that he does every morning is his address, his home address. We've talked about that, and we love to look at Google Earth, and we've talked about the different states, and they've done lots of puzzles about the states, and they can point out generally where we live. Still, it's still somewhat of an abstract concept. Like, they know all that, but I don't feel like they know that real well. And to use that, to use street names, particular street names, like the street that they live on and the city and town, and names of rivers and lakes and all, to use that to explain what a proper noun is. I don't know, it just wasn't really meshing well with my son. And so I felt like instead of teaching from the known to the unknown, there in one lesson that was supposed to be so super simple and easy, I'm having to explain a lot of other things, and I was having to really work with the script to change it up. And it just got to the point that I thought, this is a little bit ridiculous. There are way easier ways to explain what a noun is, and even what a proper noun is. Can we just maybe limit it to the people in this family? And so I felt that I just didn't feel that it was well done, bottom line. Now, grammar is one of those things that is a subject that's a requirement in our state. So I needed to do something. So I switched him over to Kumon writing. And that's another one that I had my first grader do. I think when we dumped first language lessons the first time, this is kind of what I did. I moved to a Kumon workbook. I just want straightforward statements and concepts explained in as straightforward a way as possible. And so he generally likes doing it, but I can see he's not going to retain all that. All of that isn't sinking in, everything being explained. And I'm okay with that, because I feel it's kind of ridiculous to be teaching parts of speech to a first grader. And this is just my opinion. I feel it's a little bit ridiculous that grammar beyond basic sentence structure, and, you know, you capitalize the first word in a sentence and you add punctuation, you know, grammar beyond that for a first grader, I think it's a little bit silly, because, you know, let's get them reading fluently first before going into all that. And at an older age, when they're better able to understand abstract concepts, you know, that learning, I feel, is much easier. So it's okay with me if he doesn't totally get everything. I mean, he's understanding it pretty well, but I know he's not going to retain everything that he's learned this year about grammar, and that's okay, because I know that later on he's going to get it. My oldest is using IEW's Fix-It Grammar this year, and he loves it, and he's learning a lot. And so I know that if that's something like that's working out so well for him, then my first grader, who actually loves reading and loves language, that he'll be able to get a 2 when he's a little bit older. So right now I'm just kind of checking the box for my state requirement that yes, we are studying grammar, and he's learning some things, but I'm not real stressed out about that. So that was our biggest change so far. Everything else, we'll have some changes, but it's not because we don't like it. It's because we're just moving on. For example, for Bible, he's been reading out of the Beginner's Bible. And that's my favorite children's storybook Bible because, first of all, because they can read it themselves. And second of all, because it simplifies the stories without adding a lot of fluff or without dumbing it down too much. And my first grader has loved them. He has not been interested in spiritual things before, but this year, reading it for himself, that has changed drastically. And he loves reading out of it. He'll want to read more than I require of him each day. And so he's almost done with that book, with that storybook Bible. And I was wondering what to do next, and he's already told me that after he's done with it, he wants to go back and choose particular stories that he likes and reread those. So I'm okay with that. For reading, he's in the 2nd grade Hooked on Phonics book, and that's the final level that we have for Hooked on Phonics. There's 2 workbooks for it. He's like a page shy of being done with the first level, with the first workbook in the 2nd grade level. And so he'll be moving on to the 2nd workbook. If my older son's any indication, he may finish that pretty quickly. My older son, who was a reluctant reader, and we really kind of beginning to read, really struggled through that. He seemed to fly through the final book of the level 2 of the 2nd grade level of Hooked on Phonics. So he flew through that. So my first grader, who loves to read, we'll see if he flies through that. If he does, I'll have to decide what to do next. If I'm just going to stick with a reading list like I did for my older son, or if I'll get some other reading curriculum. I don't know. I'll have to make some decisions later on this semester to decide what to do there. Something else that my son finished this year has been Spelling UC, the first level of it. He started that midway, I think it was midway last year, and I decided to just go ahead and finish it. And so we did. He finished that just before Christmas in December. And it was okay. It got the job done. Now, at the same time as he was finishing up Spelling UC, he was also, I started him on level 1 of All About Spelling, and he could spell most of those spelling words already. He's a real good little speller and a little bit advanced in language, but I'm trying not to rush through it. I want him to get used to the way All About Spelling is taught, with using the cards and the dictation, which is something we hadn't done too much of other than dictating a word. And Spelling UC, with All About Spelling, we're dictating phrases for them to write down with level 1. And so I wanted him to get used to all that, and also to get down all the rules and all the different sounds of each letter, not just the first sound. So I'm trying not to rush through it. I'm also trying to get him used to the way that I use All About Spelling. I have a separate video if you're interested in that, and how I've been using All About Spelling with my oldest son. And I found a way that really works for my older son, and I'm trying to figure out if the same way is going to work with my first grader, because they're different kids. So what works for one may not work for another, and so I'm still kind of trying to feel my way through that. But I'm trying not to rush through it, because there's some foundational learning there that he needs to have to make when we move on to an upper level of All About Spelling, to make that easier for him. As far as writing goes, so far this year we haven't done anything specifically just for writing. I guess you could say that the Kumon Writing Workbook is filling in that gap for now, serving us both writing and grammar. But since he is interested in writing more, and let me tell you, he's got lots of stories in his head, and he's got lots of words that want to come out. I think that writing will be a really good outlet for him at some point. So what my plan is when we're done with the Kumon writing workbook, we'll do a couple of projects from WriteShop Primary. I do have a separate video detailing how I used WriteShop Primary with my oldest son last year and kind of my thoughts about it. And so I feel like I've got somewhat of a handle on how that curriculum works. My first grader, when he saw his brother doing some of the projects, he was real excited to do them too, and I promised him he'd get to do them this year. So after we're done with this Kumon writing workbook, I'm not going to jump into the whole curriculum. I'm just going to choose a couple of projects that he was interested in, like the shape book, and do those with him, and some of the methodology that WriteShop Primary uses. So that's my plan for that, and I'll probably take it pretty slow, maybe even slower than I did with my with my oldest last year, so that is truly a fun experience and not a stressful experience. So that's my plan for him. We'll choose a couple of the best projects, the ones that he's interested in, and do those. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little peek into my first grader's year so far, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.